Target establishment for any purpose in any business is extremely important. If you look at Six Sigma, if you can't quantify it, you don't know anything about it. Applies to every aspect of a business. Being able to establish a metric, measures, numbers is extremely important. Um, Typically, this can be done based on past history, last year, the previous year, but in today's environment with the pandemic and COVID-19, being able to predict and achieve, put up numbers is becoming extremely important. So let's examine how exactly we put some numbers together. And this is in the framework also of the Pareto rule 80-20, which I'm talking about elsewhere, but also within how we establish targets, actuals, monitor that, and how we can close the gap within Klextra as a CXO dashboard. So you can have up to 300 metrics. Typically, you would manage 20, 30 metrics for an enterprise of any size. How do you monitor the metrics? How do you break down those metrics amongst your top leaders, division heads, and then set individual targets? How it collates up to the top at a vice president, senior sales director level. And so these are some of the basics. So it could be for any parameter in your organization. It could be sales, queue handling, logistics, production, output per day. It could be the soft skills as we talk about IQ, HQ. We'll come to the soft skills later, but you would see how each of these could be applied for any numbers that you do: processing, handling, uh, logistics. So broadly, this is applies to everything. Uh, this is a sample example set of list that we have on the left. So for any of these, typically we would have a target and you would have actuals, which you achieve over a period of time. So we have a target. We could have any number of metrics. So we're taking one metric here and saying, this is the number that we have to achieve. Now, these are staying within the boundaries. So we have set two boundaries. There's an upper boundary and a lower boundary. The upper boundary we are establishing at about an 80-20, where you would like most of the bell curve people to achieve within that. So it'll come closer to the 80-20 line. Of course, the 100% is, I'm assuming, is the capacity of your organization to handle it. Because if you do not have the capacity, then if you have not put the installed capacity in place, then you do not want excess sales. So the outer limits would be the capacity that you have installed. Team size matters because when you do have a limit on the capacity, one of the ways that you do it is put more production lines, you put more people, increase the queue sizes, increase counters. So this also assumes that there's a finite amount of that. So here we are assuming a team size for this particular example. So the 80-20 on the vertical axis and on the horizontal axis decides the inner boundary. So most of the work that we do is within the inner boundaries of those four dotted lines. So once we have established the target, then we are trying to close the gap between the target and the actuals. You set a target, the actual falls way below, either in terms of performance or quantities, uh, in numbers or in time, or we're taking two axes for those parameters. So we assume that, and then you're working on the gap and the subsequent period, which is a quarter, a month, a year. You're quantifying all the failures of the gap. So in Klextra, we have this very clear three-part aspect to every parameter. So you can have 20 parameters, 30 parameters, but each parameter will have these three things: that there's a target, there's an actual, and then there's a gap. And why that gap? If the gap is zero, then you've succeeded in the plan. Exceeding it is not a good thing either, because you would have other problems, other issues will come up if you exceed it. So being positive is not a good thing. The ideal situation is zero, that you've set a target and the target has been achieved. Anything beyond that can go into the marginal profit and other aspects that we'll talk about in other videos. So very important to establish a target for every parameter, and you're able to achieve the actual for that parameter. So likewise, you may be exceeding it. You may go beyond that. So if you achieve something which is outside the scope of the boundaries, then you will have issues. Either if the target is outside the four dotted lines, or the actual is outside the four dotted lines, you will have different types of issues and concerns with that. So the whole idea is to ensure that you have these boundaries, the upper limit, the lower limits, on the two axes, and then try and achieve those numbers within that. So within Klextra, we have this what we would call a CXO dashboard. So you could break into functional areas, each and all of these parameters. We allow up to 300 parameters, which is more than enough for most businesses to monitor their things. So it starts at the top. So the CEO metrics will be different from a CXO metrics, will be different from tactical line manager metrics. We can also establish operational metrics. For example, in OEE, capacity, output, quality. So you can even take labor, for example, garment workers or road construction, and say how many kilometers are being done per day versus garments. What's the output per hour? What's the rejection rate per hour? What's the quality? So you can bring in all these factors into any of these metrics. We've done this for a number of corporations. So this is the way to establish a target, an actual, and find the gap for that parameter, and then be able to work on improving the efficiencies, identifying the problems, and doing the risk mitigation where risk is involved. But otherwise, generally, what needs to be done to close the gap to ensure that there is a zero gap between target and actuals.